Hey guys, welcome to Think Aside. Today I wanted to talk about something a little bit different than what I have been talking about, but it's definitely along the lines of, the contradictory to normal belief. Although in today's day and age, we are seeing it more common and today what I want to talk about is sugar and, uh, and how we see it in pretty much everything we have today, right? Like all manufactured foods, especially in the Western diet, the American diet, we see it in everything. We see sugar, added sugar, we and all these things, but we are starting to see sugar-free things. Is why I say that, it's not as uncommon of a belief now to think that, maybe there's something up with sugar. And so without like, giving a crazy uh lecture on sugar and the dangers and all that stuff. That's something that you can definitely go look into yourself. I wanted to just make the point that a lot of diseases, a lot of cancers, a lot of inflammatory diseases, especially and specifically, whether that's type 2 diabetes or you could say even Alzheimer's, they're starting to see a lot of those things come from specifically uric acid, but comes from the increase in things like fructose, and which is you see high fructose corn syrup and things like that in our daily diet. And so beyond that, there's a lot of things that you hear, eat the rainbow, right? And the idea of that isn't necessarily that you need to eat the rainbow, as in like eat every color of vegetables and fruits there is, but what you need to be doing is we need to be consuming the variety of vitamins and minerals and fiber and all these things that help break down and not have a lot of sugar. And so I wanted to make the point I was learning today, and I want to kind of gear it towards this. I want to steer it toward specifically Alzheimer's disease to give kind of an example of how impactful this really is. And so I was looking at Rob Bilio, I believe is how you pronounce his last name. I never get it right, but he has a lot of really good stuff. He has this one specifically was a neuroscientist called something Dr. Palmuter or something like that. I don't remember exactly how to pronounce his name either. I'm horrible with names. uh, but he was talking how Alzheimer's, by the age 85, you have a 50% chance to develop Alzheimer's. And that's literally, as you know, that's like a you or me, right? Like the 50%, one out of two. So that's pretty crazy. So he goes into depth and he starts talking about how this is actually a very preventable disease. It's highly preventable, and how though 40 million people in the entire world deal with it, that a separate video, and I think it was still him talking about it, is that there was actually a study done in regards to Viagra. I'm sure some of you have heard about that, where Viagra was actually shown to prevent the disease by like 90%, and that was because it helps oxidize the bloodstream, something to that effect, which gets to the brain, and then it helps counter what uric acid, a buildup of uric acid does, which uric acid, from what I understand, it stops the oxidization and a bunch of other things. Um, and so I thought that was pretty crazy that something like that can help prevent it. But getting down to the fundamentals is that a diet, the daily diet, what you eat, is a big portion of pretty much every aspect of your health. The other aspect, of course, is exercise. We hear it all the time. And he goes on to talk about how 20 minutes of exercise a day of cardio, where your heart rate is, I think you said like 180 minus your age, then that that's pretty that's pretty impactful. He said about 5 days a week, hopefully more. And so it just goes to show that consuming large amounts of sugar itself is obviously bad for many reasons. But what we're starting to realize, and what the current industry, or the know in the industry, and I say industry as in science and that aspect of science, is that a large portion of what we eat and the sugar that we intake and things like that it impacts, of course, our biome, microbiome, and that's our gut, gut bacteria. And the gut actually has a very high impact on every aspect of our body. It impacts our brain, it impacts all of those things. And so knowing that our gut is made up of the things we eat, it shows why it's so important that we choose to eat things that are actually going to be helpful to us, that are going to create a good gut bacteria. They were talking in the interview actually, and this is an interesting thing, is that autism. There was a mother who had an autistic child, and she brought the child to him, the neuroscientist, Dr. Perlmutter, I think is his name, and they ended up doing a fecal matter transplant. And what that is where they screen the donor, and they take some fecal matter and they put it into the colon of the patient. And they did this with this autistic child and noticed a huge improvement over time, that they were able to do things that they weren't doing. They spent the night over the friend's house. Eventually they were actually giving a book report in front of their class. And so anyone that knows anything about autism, or has an autistic family member or friend, or close friend or anything like that, how difficult those type of things is. He explains it as using an FM radio in a storm, or in a lightning storm, how there's just that constant interference. And so this kid ended up being in advanced classes in like the top 10% of his class. And so that's an example of how important the gut is. And I just wanted to talk a little bit about that, and how kind of to go full circle, is that a big portion too is that your mind has, I think it was called like BDNF or something like that. Uh, it's brain development neuro something factor, something to that effect, which is saying, and that actually is created through a few different things, like CBD oil. Actually, I guess was found that it increases it, but a big factor, and what the most natural factor, of course, is to exercise, and how exercising actually creates more of that chemical in your mind. And that chemical, what it does is it actually helps you, uh, more or less create brain cells. And so it allows you to continue developing your brain. And of course, the other factor is when repetition, when you do something, then he had put it as brain cells that fire together, wire together. And so as you do something over and over and over, of course, certain neuropaths and stuff like that are firing. They're, creating those pathways. And then as you do it over time, it stays. And so there's a lot of interesting things that go on with the mind, and the longevity of the mind, and how you can preserve it, and stop things like Alzheimer's by doing exercise, by eating correctly, by negating sugar and allowing the buildup of uric acid. And they actually talked too about how the plaque buildup in the mind from Alzheimer's, it's not actually the plaque that is causing the problem. It is, and they've proved this because they have actually removed the plaque in patients with Alzheimer's, and they've noticed that the effects of Alzheimer's have actually gone quicker. The patients have declined faster without the plaque buildup. And the reason for this is because they have decided and discovered that the plaque buildup is actually a protection mechanism that the brain does as a result of Alzheimer's. And so excuse me. And so that's actually a big aspect that was missed for a long time. And it turns out that there's no drug for Alzheimer's that actually works or helps Alzheimer's. And a lot of them actually make Alzheimer's worse. They decline faster on these drugs, being that they're trying to make sense that they're probably trying to get rid of the plaque. I don't know exactly. I don't know enough about the medicine itself. All I know is that it doesn't work. So that's another aspect to keep in mind, that and I think this goes back to the whole idea of my channel, right? Of the think aside the normal belief, is because what science said yesterday or a year ago as normal and what's effective, or even sometimes what they're saying now, isn't necessarily effective and isn't necessarily okay, or it isn't necessarily bad. They actually talk about cholesterol and how cholesterol is actually what is used to turn into vitamin D and things like that when you're in the sun. It's used for testosterone. It's used for a lot of cortisone, I think you said as well. And so there's a lot of things that, what we think is common belief and normal, fact, it's not fact, and we really need to consider, is this true, and then look into it and decide for ourselves. I drive a lot of my decisions based on what I feel is right, not necessarily what someone says is okay, and that's served me quite well. But I do think it's important to stay on top of it and to take into account that what we know is true now might not always be true, and then look at the possibilities of what is actually right, and consider our daily diet. And I encourage and challenge every single one of you to do a little more exercise and do a little more eating correctly. And this isn't because we're not going to live forever. That's very unlikely. Yeah, there is some science actually trying to do that, and it seems pretty promising. But until then, if that ever happens anyway, we're not going to live forever, right? And I get that. But the argument of we're all going to die one day, so what? That's the part that I don't understand. That's the part that, seems to be kind of like shooting ourselves in the foot. It's like if I'm going to go walk a mile and I know I need to walk a mile, but and I want to walk that mile, right? I want to walk that mile, but I cut my foot off right before I go. It's going to be a lot harder to walk that mile. It's going to be a lot less enjoyable, right? It's the same idea. We might not live forever, but while we live, why not make it the best quality life or living that we can, right? That makes sense to me. It might not make sense to you, but it's not about quantity as much as it's about quality. And just remember that if you're waking up with a headache, or if you're waking up not feeling, you're feeling tense, or you're feeling overwhelmed, and you're going to bed, with a bunch of anxiety or depression, or maybe you have inflammation somewhere, or whatever it is, consider what you're doing and see, about making some changes in your life to help change the outcome, help change the quality, and make the quality of your life better. A lot of the issues that we struggle with individually are due to the things we do and consume individually. We can't expect to have whatever we want and then to feel however we want. It's one or the other. Thank you. Think aside.